Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Bramburger. The book I was asked to read as part of the Ottawa Valley Reads competition is called The Boat People, the first novel written by Sharon, Bala. This is a really excellent book. It is full with twists and turns and really leaves the reader immersed in this story about many migrants who arrived, more than 500 of them, from war-torn Sri Lanka to the Canadian West Coast in Vancouver. And over the course of the book, which is almost 400 pages long, it's a story primarily about three characters. One of the migrants, a man named Mahindan, as well as an articling student named Priya, who was assigned to support some of these refugee claimants in their desire to have permanent residency here in Canada. And also Grace, who is a longtime civil servant who has worked primarily in the transportation department of the federal and provincial governments, and now is asked to be an adjudicator, listening to testimony and stories from these migrants and making decisions on whether or not they should be allowed to stay in Canada or be deported. Mahindan is probably the most interesting character, I think, in this book. He is a man who is from Sri Lanka. He was a mechanic there. He lost his wife during childbirth. They had only one child. And this little boy, Cillian, is only 6 years old when they are forced to leave war-torn Sri Lanka, which is in the midst of a nasty civil war. And he is trying to find a way forward for he and his son in a new country in Canada. As soon as they get here, they're separated. Women and children are sent to one prison where they are kept and treated very well by the Canadians, but it still is in a prison environment. And he is sent with men. The more than 500 migrants that arrived in Canada are separated. And he's there almost a year by the time the book ends. I will say, though, that we really don't know what Mahindan was all about, because we hear stories about this very caring father who is trying to do the best for his little boy, having lost his wife and now trying to make a new life in another country. But at the same time, we hear conflicting stories about his work with the Tamil Tigers, who were considered a separatist organization and were at war, and are also capable of terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka. And Canada is very, very reluctant to admit some of these refugees into our country because of the fear that they will be involved in terrorist attacks on Canadian soil. And so there are flashbacks in this book where Mahindan is telling stories about his past in Sri Lanka and now talking about his reality, being jailed in this new country where he believes there is so much promise for he and his son. So we hear things about him working on vehicles in Sri Lanka that are later used in terrorist attacks where innocent people are killed in Sri Lanka. We hear about fake identifications and, taking identification ID cards from deceased people that are killed in the war-torn Sri Lanka, and then using that as ways of making money, selling off these IDs and selling off jewelry and things like this. So we are really, really tormented by who is this man? Who is he? Should he be allowed to stay in Canada? Is he a threat to Canadians? Or is he a man that was forced into this unfortunate situation as he tried to stay away from being brought into this Tamil Tigers group? But he is just so torn by everything that he is doing and trying to find a path forward. So in the final analysis, I think the reader is left with this question: who is he? Which was really, really difficult to grasp, because you feel in the book, which is very, very effective, that you want to know more about the story and you're trying to piece it together. And I think the author has done a wonderful job sort of saying, you, the reader, must decide, who is this man? And does he deserve this opportunity to remain in Canada? For Priya, who is this articling student who is now representing refugees and defending them and trying to build their case about why they should be able to stay in Canada, she too is tortured by this process. She's wondering the same thing. Who are these people? What is their background? Should I be defending them? She really wants to be a corporate lawyer, but she's brought into this as she starts her career in law. And she has many, many sleepless nights trying to understand, who am I defending? Am I doing the right thing? And then there's Grace, who is someone who has worked in government for many, many years, but feels in many respects that she's in over her head when she's hearing at these hearings, and one after another, these migrants are being brought before this judicial system, and she's hearing evidence and having to, delay or put off their ability to get status that will allow them to be released from detention and be part of Canadian society. It is not an easy time for her. She's feeling like she doesn't know enough about the refugee system. She's feeling that she in some ways is not qualified to be in the position that she is, but she's friendly with the minister who is pressuring her to take a hard line, really saying, we don't want to let anybody into Canada that may be a threat to Canadians. And so she's hearing these stories and trying to figure out what's fact and what's fiction. And she is crumbling under the weight of some of the stress that has been put on her. But in the final analysis, she believes she's doing important work, and she is doing her absolute best. But you can feel the pressure that's on her family life in particular. So this book is really well written, and I think it gives the reader a completely new perspective on the plight of refugees that arrive here in our country. And they have various backgrounds. They have been forced in some respects to get on these ships under the cover of darkness to try to escape from a war-torn region and get to Canadian soil where they believe there is the promise of a better life because Canada has been so welcoming to immigrants and refugees in its history. But in this particular book, the greeting they receive is a surprise. There is a lot of media coverage, a lot of politics involved, where there is some question that we're going to probably deport as a country many of these refugees because we think as a country, at least government thinks, and the adjudicators believe that some are in fact a threat and should be deported. But the weight of that decision is not easy on the people making the decisions. In fact, in one case, one of the migrants takes his own life while in detention. And again, you can feel the human emotion that is involved in that with Priya as well as Grace as she's making these decisions. And Mahindan, the man who took his own life, is his cellmate, if you will, or his roommate while they're in detention. And he wonders too about how much longer can he stay in detention in this new country and not be able to go outdoors and see what Canada has to offer. It's a complex book. It's a rich read. It is very well told by the author, but it certainly leaves anyone who is not very familiar with the plight of refugees or the Canadian judicial system and how it addresses the claims of migrants when they want to remain in our country. It's an eye-opener. And it's really a well-written, well-researched book. And while it is a fictional book, the grounding of this book is very non-fictional. For all of those reasons, as I share this story, I encourage you to pick up a copy of this book, The Boat People, written by Sharon Bala. It is an outstanding read, a wonderful novel, and I hope that you will consider this book as you review all of the submissions that are being made through Ottawa Valley Reads, through the local immigration partnership of Lanark and Renfrew. Thank you.